We have been told the story of Genesis as a gentle beginning, a perfect garden, a world spoken into existence out of a quiet void. But behind the familiar words of "in the beginning" lies a shadow, a truth so profound, so combative, that it was intentionally veiled for millennia. What if the story of creation wasn't a peaceful poem, but a declaration of war? This is a question that is almost never asked from the pulpit. Was the Garden of Eden a serene sanctuary? Or was it the first battlefield in a spiritual conflict against the pagan gods of Babylon? Ancient Hebrew texts, when read alongside the dark creation myths they were meant to overthrow, reveal a startling picture. A picture of a God not just creating, but conquering chaos and darkness with every spoken word. Understanding this hidden conflict is not merely an academic exercise. It changes the very foundation of our faith. It reveals why we were created, not as servants to appease angry deities as the Babylonians believed, but as rulers, given dominion by the one true king. The purpose of Adam was not just to tend a garden, but to stand as a testament against a world built on slavery and fear. The clues have been there all along, hidden in plain sight within the structure of the 7 days. If you've ever felt there was more to the story, a power and a purpose just beyond your grasp, you were right. Join us on this journey into the forgotten truth of Genesis, and you will see the beginning of all things in a light you never imagined possible. Let's begin with a detail that is so often overlooked it might as well have been erased. We read Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 and are told the earth was without form and void. We picture an empty, silent space, but the original Hebrew paints a far more menacing picture. The words are tohu v'avohu, not just emptiness but a state of wild, untamed chaos, a desolate wasteland. And upon this chaos, a darkness lingered. Have you ever stopped to truly consider that verse? And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Why is this scene so active? If it was just an empty void, why would the Spirit of God need to move upon or hover over the waters? Was God simply observing an empty stage before the performance began? Or was he confronting something that was already there? Something that had to be subdued before creation could even start? This is where a forgotten truth begins to surface. The ancient world was filled with stories of creation, but they were stories of violence, where gods battled monsters, and the world was born from cosmic warfare. The Babylonians, neighbors to the Israelites, had such a story, a tale of a monstrous sea goddess of chaos. What if the Bible's opening lines were not written in a vacuum, but as a direct answer to that darkness? A declaration that our God does not battle monsters, He commands them. If this idea is beginning to open your mind, be sure you are subscribed, because the evidence we are about to uncover is profound. The key lies in that one word, the deep. In Hebrew, tehom. To our modern ears, it means a vast ocean, but to an ancient Israelite, that word would have sent a chill down their spine. It sounded eerily similar to the name of Babylon's most feared deity of chaos. This was not a passive body of water. This was an opposing force. And God's first spoken words, "Let there be light," were not just an act of creation. They were the first shot, fired in a war for reality itself. But what exactly was this deep, and why was its memory so intentionally suppressed? The memory of the deep was suppressed because it had a name. In the Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish, the creation story the Israelites were surrounded by, the formless chaos was not an inanimate thing. It was a goddess. A monstrous, swirling dragon of salt water named Tiamat. She was the mother of all gods, the embodiment of primordial chaos. Now look again at the Bible. The Holy Spirit hovers over the tehom the deep. Our scripture doesn't name the monster, it demotes it. God doesn't engage in a cosmic battle with a rival deity. He speaks, and the chaos is given its boundaries. The silence of the Bible on this point is deafening. It's a display of absolute, uncontested power. But this memory of a great conflict wasn't entirely erased. It was preserved in the shadows of other sacred texts and ancient Jewish traditions. The Book of Enoch, for instance, speaks of a time before creation when primordial forces were judged. Ancient rabbinic commentaries, known as the Midrash, whisper of God wrestling with the Leviathan at the dawn of time, crushing its heads to establish order. Imagine ancient scribes, by the faint glow of an oil lamp, preserving these echoes of a cosmic war. Truths they knew were too raw, too combative for the main text, but too important to be completely forgotten. These were not just myths, they were puzzle pieces of a concealed history. Why would such a powerful truth be veiled? Why soften a story of conquest into a gentle poem of creation? Consider the world into which the faith of Abraham would spread. As the message moved from Jerusalem to Rome, this narrative of a battle against a chaos dragon sounded dangerously similar to the pagan myths the early church was trying to overcome. To a Roman or a Greek, it could be easily dismissed. It is believed that early church councils, in their wisdom, chose to emphasize God as the supreme, unopposed creator. The battle was downplayed. The polemic was softened. The story was preserved, but its sharp warrior edge was intentionally blunted, hidden away to make the faith more accessible. A piece of the truth was sacrificed for the sake of clarity. This forgotten context reframes the entire week of creation. It was not just a process, it was a campaign. Each day was a strategic move to dismantle the pagan worldview and establish God's divine order on contested ground. When God creates the sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day, He is not just hanging lights in the sky. He is publicly declaring that the great celestial gods of Babylon and Egypt are nothing more than inanimate objects, tools created by His hand. They are not deities to be worshipped, but timekeepers for His divine appointments. But if the first 6 days were about dethroning false gods, what was the true hidden purpose of the seventh? The answer is not about rest, it's about enthronement. Imagine for a moment an uncensored version of Genesis, a version where the story was not softened for a wider audience. In this telling, the seventh day isn't about God resting from fatigue. It is a king ascending his throne after a decisive victory. The text wouldn't just say God separated the waters, it would declare that He subdued them. The firmament in the sky would be understood not as a gentle dome, but as a boundary established upon the defeated body of the primordial deep, a direct polemic against the Babylonian myth, where their god Marduk builds the heavens from the slain carcass of Tiamat. But here is the critical difference. Where Marduk engaged in a desperate, bloody battle, the God of the Bible would have achieved this victory with a single, effortless word. This is not mere speculation. The memory of this conflict echoes throughout the Old Testament, hidden in the poetry of the Psalms and the visions of the prophets. Psalm chapter 74 cries out, "It was you who crushed the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. It was you who broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces." Job 26 speaks of God's power that stilled the sea and pierced the fleeing serpent. These are not just metaphors for storms. They are fragmented memories of a foundational war. The war against the chaos dragon, the Leviathan, the Hebrew name for the untamed abyss that God brought to heel before a single mountain was formed. By veiling this conflict, the story of creation was stripped of its immediate political and spiritual power. We were left with a picture of a divine architect, but we lost the image of the divine warrior king. Adam was not placed in a simple garden. He was installed as a priest king in the world's first temple, a beachhead of divine order established on conquered territory. His command to subdue the earth suddenly takes on a new, more profound meaning. It was not a call to farming. It was a royal commission to expand the borders of God's holy kingdom against the darkness that still pressed in from the outside. But the most powerful revelation is this: the true version of the story is the one we have, precisely because it shows a victory won without a struggle. God's sovereignty is so absolute that he does not need to lift a finger. He speaks, and the monsters are silenced. He commands, and the chaos is given its borders. The seventh day, then, is the coronation. It is God taking his seat on the throne of the cosmos, not to rest, but to rule. And in his first royal act, he invites humanity to share in that rule. But if the garden was God's throne room on earth, and Adam was his royal heir, then what was the serpent? It was far more than a simple beast. It was the voice of the defeated chaos, returning to stage a rebellion. The story we are told in Sunday school is one of a gentle creator and a peaceful garden. It is a beautiful story, but it is incomplete. It is a truth with its heart removed. The version we inherited is a pastoral poem. But the truth that was forged in the fires of spiritual warfare was a declaration of war, a divine polemic against the gods of Babylon. By presenting creation as a serene act, the raw, confrontational power of Genesis was intentionally sheathed, like a sword hidden in a velvet cloth. We were taught about our origins, but not about our purpose as rulers. But why? Why would anyone conceal such a profound truth? You must understand the world the early church was born into. As the apostles and their followers carried the gospel from Jerusalem into the Roman Empire, they were surrounded by pagan myths. Stories of gods battling sea monsters were common. To a Greek or a Roman, the story of God conquering a chaos dragon named Leviathan might have sounded dangerously familiar, just another local myth. It is believed that early church fathers and influential councils made a strategic choice. For the faith to grow, for the message to be clear, it had to be simplified. The battle was downplayed to emphasize God's unopposed majesty. In their wisdom, these ancient leaders decided which texts would be elevated and which would be left in the shadows. They curated a canon that was pure, accessible, and distinct from the paganism it sought to replace. The combative nature of Genesis, its direct assault on Babylonian theology, was deemed too complex, too easily misunderstood. So the story was softened. The warrior king was presented only as a loving father. The declaration of war was reframed as a quiet poem. They preserved the truth, but they veiled its power. The consequence of this decision echoes through the centuries. We were left with a story of a fall from grace, but we lost the context of a rebellion against a throne. We were taught that Adam was a gardener, but not that he was a king commissioned to expand God's dominion. This veiling of the truth didn't just change how we see creation. It fundamentally altered our understanding of the enemy, obscuring the true identity of the serpent and the real reason he chose to strike at humanity. And it's in that hidden identity that the entire plan of salvation is revealed. So we must ask the question, who was the serpent? We have been taught to see it as a literal snake, a simple creature used as a vessel. But the original Hebrew word, nachash asterisk, carries a far more potent meaning. It means the shining one. This was no mere animal. This was a radiant, powerful, and intelligent being, a high-ranking member of the divine council. Ancient Jewish tradition, preserved in texts like the Life of Adam and Eve, is clear on this point. The entity that entered the garden was not some lowly beast from the field. It was a celestial prince in disguise. But that's not the most shocking revelation. The description of this shining one echoes the language used for the most powerful beings in God's throne room, the seraphim, whose very name means the fiery burning ones. The prophet Ezekiel gives us a chilling glimpse into this being's past, describing a, quote, guardian cherub who was in Eden, the garden of God, adorned with every precious stone, a being perfect in beauty and wisdom from the day he was created. This wasn't just the voice of chaos. This was its most glorious champion, now fallen from grace. This knowledge changes the entire dynamic of the story. The temptation of Adam and Eve was not a random act of mischief. It was a calculated counterattack, an act of high treason from a being who once stood in the presence of God. This is the kind of biblical depth that has been overlooked for far too long. If you feel this hidden truth stirring something in your spirit, consider sharing this video with someone you know who seeks a deeper faith. Sometimes, seeing the truth requires a guide to point it out. And this leads us to the final, terrifying question that hangs over the entire story of the fall. The serpent was not just a symbol of rebellion, it was a specific entity with a history and a name. Its crime was not born in the Garden of Eden. The garden was simply the new battlefield for a war that had already been lost in the heavens. So the real mystery is not what tempted humanity, but why. What could possibly motivate a perfect, shining guardian of God's throne to risk everything to bring down two people made of dust? What was the one thing he possessed that he refused to give, and the one thing humanity was given that he could not bear? The answer lies in the one thing this celestial prince possessed, and the one thing humanity was given. What he possessed was unparalleled rank and glory. What he refused to give was honor to a being he saw as his inferior. And the one thing humanity was given that he could not bear was the very image of God. The command to subdue the earth and have dominion was not just a task, it was a coronation. Humanity, made of dust, was crowned with a glory and honor that this shining one believed was his alone. The temptation was an act of cosmic defiance, a rebellion against the divine order that placed mankind as God's royal representatives on earth. This hidden knowledge does not tear down the foundations of your faith. It reinforces them with steel. It reveals that the story of the fall is not about a simple mistake, but a direct assault on the purpose for which you were created. We were made to be image bearers, rulers under the authority of the great King. The serpent's target was not our bodies, but the divine reflection we carried within us. He sought to corrupt God's image on earth, to prove that humanity was unworthy of the crown it had been given. Understanding this deepens everything. It explains the ferocity of the spiritual battle we still find ourselves in today. The enemy's goal has never changed: to mar the image of God in His creation, to convince us that we are slaves, not sons and daughters of the King. This ancient war, which began before the foundation of the world, was brought to a garden where humanity was meant to stand as God's viceroys. The garden was the throne room, Adam was the prince, and the serpent was the usurper who came to steal the birthright. And so, the stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. The serpent, the voice of the defeated chaos, could not challenge God directly. So he chose to strike at the one who bore God's likeness. But what was the weapon he used? We have been told it was a piece of fruit, but it was so much more than that. It was a promise, a temptation, and a curse, all wrapped together in the mystery of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And its true purpose in the garden is perhaps the most guarded secret of all. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was not a simple test of obedience. It was a choice between two thrones. In the ancient world, the phrase knowing good and evil was not about moral innocence. It was a royal idiom. It meant having the absolute authority to define reality for oneself, to be the source of your own law. It was the power of a king. God, the true king, had defined reality. The serpent, the fallen prince, offered humanity a chance to seize that power for themselves, to sit on a different throne, one built on self-will and rebellion. The fruit was not the prize, the throne was. This is the hidden key that unlocks the entire story. The war against the Chaos Dragon was God establishing His sovereign throne over creation. Placing Adam in the garden was God anointing His human son as a co-regent, a prince to rule under His authority. The tree, therefore, presented the ultimate choice of allegiance: rule with God, trusting his divine order, or rule for yourself, embracing the chaos of self-deification. Adam's sin was not just eating a piece of fruit, it was an act of high treason. He abdicated his God-given throne, and in doing so, handed the keys of the kingdom to the enemy. But the story does not end in the shadow of that tree. The failure of the first Adam was the divine prelude to the coming of the second Adam, Jesus Christ. Where the first king failed in a perfect garden, the true king triumphed in a desolate wilderness. The serpent offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world, the very dominion Adam had lost, but Christ refused the usurper's crown. He chose the path of perfect obedience, the path that led not to a throne of power, but to a cross of sacrifice. On that cross, he crushed the head of the serpent and disarmed the powers of chaos and darkness forever. This is the ultimate revelation of Genesis. The creation account is not just the story of how the world began. It is the prologue to the gospel. It is the story of a throne, a rebellion, and a king who came to reclaim what was lost and restore us to our rightful place as sons and daughters of the Most High. The war that began in the darkness before time was won by the light of the world on a hill called Calvary. And in his victory, the invitation to rule with him is extended once more. If this journey into the hidden truths of our faith has awakened your spirit, subscribe now and join us. For the story of God is deeper and more powerful than we were ever told, and the greatest discoveries are still to come. This ancient battle for the throne changes everything we thought we knew about God's plan. We have been taught a story of redemption, a rescue mission for a fallen race. But what this hidden truth reveals is a story of restoration. God is not just saving us from sin. He is restoring us to our rightful place as his royal heirs. This was never just about getting to heaven. It has always been about bringing heaven to earth, ruling and reigning with him, as we were originally created to do. The enemy's greatest victory was not in causing Adam to fall, but in making his descendants forget they were ever meant to stand as kings. This is not a truth for the spiritually complacent. If you are watching this, it is because you have likely felt that something profound was missing from the modern Christian message. You have sensed a power and a purpose just beyond the veil of familiar sermons. You have hungered for a faith that was more than just a set of rules or a comforting weekly ritual. You were not looking for a new faith, but for the original, untamed power of the one you already hold. This knowledge was not lost by accident, and it is not being rediscovered by chance. It finds those who are prepared to carry its weight. Think about the spiritual emptiness so many feel today, the sense of powerlessness, the feeling of being a spectator in a world overrun by darkness. Where does this come from? It comes from a faith that has been stripped of its authority. We have been taught to see ourselves as humble sheep, but we have forgotten that we are also lions from the tribe of Judah. We have been told to be servants, but we have forgotten our commission as royal ambassadors. This superficial faith, this absence of spiritual depth, is the direct inheritance of a story that had its warrior heart removed. We were given a lullaby when we were meant to be given a battle cry. And so this revelation is not just a piece of ancient history. It is a divine invitation to reclaim your identity. It is a call to step out of a slave mentality and into your royal inheritance through Christ. The spiritual war that began in the darkness before creation is not over. It is being fought in your life, in your family, and in your world, every single day. Understanding this truth is like being handed a map and a sword that were hidden from you. It changes how you pray, how you resist the enemy, and how you understand your own value to the King of Kings. You were not created to be a pawn in a cosmic game. You were created to be a ruler, an image bearer, a co-heir with Christ, tasked with expanding the borders of his unshakable kingdom. Take a moment and let this truth settle in your spirit. For centuries, the story of our beginning has been a whisper, when it was meant to be a roar, a truth silenced, a battle cry softened into a lullaby. If you have ever felt that your faith was meant for more, that a power and an authority were promised to you that you could never quite grasp, now you know why. You are not looking for a new story. You are remembering the one that was taken from you. The story of a throne, an inheritance, and a royal identity given to you before the foundations of the world. This is not a new gospel. It is the original one, with its warrior heart restored. These are the truths that were veiled by councils and forgotten over time, preserved only in the shadows of ancient texts and in the echoes of the prophets. But nothing hidden stays hidden from God. We believe these truths are coming to light now, in our time, for a reason. They are being revealed to a generation that must remember who they are in Christ, not victims of a fallen world, but victorious heirs of a heavenly kingdom. This knowledge is a divine appointment. If this truth burns in your heart and awakens your spirit, show your support so this message can reach others. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to activate the notification bell. And now, we have a way for you to partner with us more deeply. We have a members area. When you become a member, you bless this work directly and help us continue to produce edifying and revealing content like this, bringing forgotten light out of the darkness. Finally, we want to see how far this rediscovered truth is traveling across the world. In the comments below, please write where you are watching from, so that we can all see how far the light of this revelation is reaching hearts. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Go now, not as a servant, but as the royal heir you were always meant to be.